Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is your host, Jordan Tremaine, and welcome to the Perspective Podcast, where we explore new thoughts, connect ideas, and offer new perspectives that may change the way you think about a thing or two. And today, we're going to talk about unlearning. All right, everybody. So, hello. Welcome to today's episode. I don't know what time of day it is for you, but we're going to talk about something interesting today. I call it unlearning, and I've seen a good amount of memes about this. And when I say meme, it's not always like a funny picture with one sentence. By meme, I mean more in like the Richard Dawkins sense from The Selfish Gene, that book, where he talks about memetics, which is like the science of memes that he came up with. Where a meme is like a unit of thought. It's like one idea. And then we build more complex thoughts. Like a meme is like a brick. And as you build more and more complex thoughts, you take these bricks like Legos and you build walls and houses and cities and all that kind of stuff. But you're trying to break down ideas into, it's like how you break down stuff in atoms, and then atoms get broken down into like electrons and protons and neutrons, and then those get broken down further and further. The meme is supposed to be the smallest unit of a thought that you can have, which I think is why we call those funny pictures memes, because it's just like one little thought. And I am saying that because I've seen a meme, not necessarily a funny picture, but kind of just like one burst of thought on the internet. And caution to that, I'll probably do an episode later about how the more memey you make something, the more simple you make something, the more you lose kind of its value. But I've seen this meme about unlearning, and it's like, if you're not willing to unlearn stuff, then you can't grow. Like, this is one of your major tools for growth, is unlearning. And so we're going to dive into it a little bit today, basically because of what I just said, where when it shows up in a meme, it seems specious, where like it seems plausible. You read it in a sentence, it's easy to digest. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I know what that means. But there's normally a lot more to it that's being ignored, or that's being kind of like glossed over. And once you dig into the meat and potatoes of it a little bit, then it can have kind of like what we talked about in the depth inversion podcast, where it could have a flip. It could have a change in meaning because you dug a little deeper into it. So we're going to dive into this topic, and I think that unlearning is a wonderfully useful skill, and I might even step out and say that unlearning is the most important skill that we are not taught, like as a community. It's like a lot of people are like, what, you should teach me about taxes in school. You should teach me about how to vote. You should teach me like useful stuff in high school. Why are you teaching me English? Why are you teaching me math? I think English and math are pretty dope and pretty useful. I can understand why people want to be taught taxes and stuff like that. But I think that unlearning, as far as skills that are not taught, unlearning is like heavy. It's a heavy hitter. And it's something that's hard to do. It's something that's hard to even recognize that you should do. And so there's even a skill to like knowing something needs to be unlearned. And then there's even another skill, which is actually unlearning. But we're going to talk about that today. And yeah, let's get into it. So I've been talking about this thing called the work in a couple of the podcasts that I've been doing. And by the work, I mean like the stuff you do on the inside of you, like when you're thinking and you're self-reflecting and you like recognize your shortcomings, you recognize where you can grow, where you can learn, maybe where you steered wrong and Google Maps needs to like clear you back over to the right direction. That's the work, where you're doing the self-improvement stuff. I think that stuff is super important, and it's very necessary, and unlearning is part of that. But it's an interesting part of that, because unlearning is like I think a lot of people think of learning as like a ladder where you're supposed to like climb up this ladder, like you do climbing up the ladder, and then you get to the top of the learning chain and you've learned the stuff. But I think learning is more like a road trip where there's a destination, kind of like the top of the ladder, but it's super possible to make a bunch of wrong turns and get lost or get in a car accident. There's all these other dangers. It's not as straightforward as a ladder. And today we're going to talk about making wrong turns and recalculating. Turn left here instead. Like the directions, like understanding that you're lost and trying to get new directions. So when you're doing the work, part of that is undoing a bunch of nonsense that's in your head that's not helping you and replacing it with something that's more useful. And this, I like, when I think about it, I so wish this was like an integrated part of public school curriculum. And not like, okay, guys, today chapter 3 is about unlearning. So we're going to learn about unlearning. Not like that, because I don't think that's going to get the point across at all. I'm gonna set up an example for you, and kind of like how I went to Cal Poly Pomona for college, and back when I went there, because they've changed their slogan to something whatever that I forgot, but back when I went there, their slogan was "Learn by Doing," and that is what I am advocating right now. So check this out. Imagine if you were in grade school, let's say you were in like 6th or 7th grade or something like that, maybe high school, and for a week or two, your teacher taught you a lesson. There's like, regular lesson on every day. Gave you homework assignments, and then gave you a test, and like all the stuff was like learning some part of the subject matter for the class. And somewhere after that, like in the middle of teaching, the teacher basically stops, and this could be like weeks later. It doesn't have to be immediately after. It could be weeks later. They just stop and they're like, hold on a second. All that stuff we went over in chapter 3, my bad. That was incorrect. Here's the real stuff. Test on Friday. Or maybe they're like, oh, that was incorrect. Here's the real stuff. And just moved on. Like, we did something wrong. We're going to change and move on. But like the teacher spent like at least a couple of days, more like a week or 2 weeks, like really teaching you and really acting like it was the right thing and getting you to learn and study and take a test, only to later say like, that was wrong and here's different stuff. That'd be super frustrating. And I think a lot of people would be mad and like, you just wasted my time. Why did we do this? Da, 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 da. But I think going through that experience, especially in school, because school is like it's like a safe place to make mistakes and there's not too many consequences. So when you go through stuff like that in school, it really doesn't impact your real life. Like if you learned something wrong in your real life and then you were acting on that information in real life, it could really jam you up. It could really like mess up your finances. It could get you in the wrong relationship. You can move to the wrong place. You can get stabbed. Like a lot of stuff could happen because you have the wrong information in real life. But when you have the wrong information in school, and it's kind of controlled because the teacher knows, in this example, the teacher knows that it's wrong information, so they get to kind of control the situation a little bit, then it doesn't really damage you too much. It just kind of, what you think wastes a couple weeks, but it really plays you out and forces you to go through this experience of thinking something is right. Everybody around you is thinking it's right. It's like the cultural norm. And then it being exposed that it's wrong and you having to change and course correct and reflect and say like, okay, which parts were wrong? Was it this part? Was it that part? Okay, how do I need to change? How do I need to do something different? Because this is something that happens all the time in regular life. And I think going through this kind of training phase or going through an example like this, and you can also do this as a parent, because I think schools are probably not going to do this, but you could definitely do this as a parent. And I would caution you to think about the entire process before you just got all excited and went and did this with your kids, because this is kind of like an experiment. I'm not like a child psychologist or something, so I don't know how this is going to work out in real life. So I'd say like do kind of a plan, maybe start off little. And I'd say do it kind of regularly where your kid gets used to this and they start questioning stuff. Like when you tell them, like they question everything because like, oh, you've been wrong before. So what's up with this? And not to make them like a skeptic and a cynic and stuff, but to have that natural inquisitive mind and not to just accept things just because somebody in authority, like my parents or my teacher, told me. It's like, it's because I really think this, because I really believe this, because I've validated it a little bit. I've thought about it a little bit, and okay, it checks out. And then they could still be wrong, but then they're like, okay, so I validated a little bit and I was still wrong. Okay, let me change, let me course correct. And having that kind of mentality, having that capability to do that without like having an anxiety attack or without shutting down or getting ultra angry and ultra bitter, I think is like a really good skill to have. And if you can cultivate that in little kids, they're going to be like way more resilient. Like how, little kids are like made out of rubber where you like throw them on the ground and they don't break any bones, they just bounce. Like that, but for their like mentality and for the way they act and their ability to move as adults, they just like bounce back. So I think that would be cool as a parent to every once in a while like knowingly teach your kid something false. Or what I think would be really cool, because this actually is like a double thing where there's certain subjects like history where you could tell a story that's like technically true, but it's from a certain point of view, and then later you can tell a different point of view and it like totally changes the narrative even though both are right. So then you kind of have to like sift through and say like, oh, what do I believe, what do I think is right, what do I think is wrong, I need to think about this, maybe I need to course correct some of the beliefs that I held when I only had this side story, but now that I have both sides story, I'm like, oh, maybe that guy wasn't so evil. And like kind of having these situations occur that really make people think about what is true, what is not true. What did I learn that was false? What did I learn that was true? What is false? What is true? And like really getting the thinking going. I think it's great. But it's for the person that's going through this process, it's like mad frustrating. So be patient with them. Don't give them too much, and don't give them like this big old giant mountain to deal with. And if you're gonna like do this to your kids, or if you're a teacher and you're thinking of doing this, I'd say like, especially for little kids, do this in real small doses, and like kind of build up their tolerance to this. And if they're older, okay, you can go a little harder on them, but like this is something that I think is very foreign from other types of like skills with your behavior and stuff like that, your ability to like think and do something. So like to make this go well, I think like, okay, today we're going to do 1 push-up. Tomorrow we're going to do 2 push-ups. Next day we're going to do 3 push-ups. And like build up. Don't be like, okay, today we're going to do 100 push-ups. And it's like, ultimately what I'm saying is like, if you're trying to get or help somebody get to a place, do what you can to set them up for success. And in this case, with the unlearning thing, setting them up for success is putting them in a situation where they learned something and they thought it was right, but is really wrong. So from their perspective, you set them up for failure, but you set them up for success because the whole point of this is how to deal with failure and how to navigate it. So you gotta be careful about how you implement this because of how it's going to be perceived. But that Bard, even if you don't get taught this somehow by some like master chess player that's trying to like move chess pieces of your life to help you learn stuff, like even if you have to teach this to yourself, which I think is way more likely the case, this is an important skill and it will come in handy, and you will run into these things like everybody will. Nobody only learns true information, and even if that's possible somehow, like I said with the history example, true can be very subjective, and so learning other truths can really change your perspective, which is kind of the point of this podcast, to give you different perspectives or angles of perspective or sides of truth so you can more appreciate and see the bigger picture. So I think we run into this unlearning thing all the time in our regular lives, and if there's ever a setting where you can go through this as a group and then talk about it and understand what happened and move through it, I think it really does solidify this as a tool in your tool belt. And if you have to go through it on your own, it can be more confusing, and there's a lot more trial and error, and you may not totally get the lesson. Or you may get the lesson, but you may also end up with stuff like being bitter or angry or resentful, or now you believe someone's a liar or something like that, which may be the case. But ultimately, at the end of the day, however you achieve this, like when you play video games and you do enough of something in a video game and you unlock an achievement, like however you achieve this, I hope this is something that you can do. I hope this is a skill that you're aware of and that you can build experience in and learn how to navigate and help other people navigate, because it's really confusing, because it's kind of backwards where you need to unlearn something. Like, who does that? Hopefully everybody. But for somebody that's not used to it, it seems like a very ridiculous idea. And also it could be very difficult, because like you could be solidly convinced that an idea is true, or that what you believe is true. Because this works for things you learn, that's knowledge, and learn stuff you hold as beliefs. But I mean, in my personal life, there's plenty of stuff where I think it's true, and then when I get a reality check, or I hit a reality filter. If you want to go back and listen to that episode on reality filters, I realize that what I thought was true was not true. And it forces me to go through this process, or it gives me the opportunity to go through this process. And I try my best to update my software inside my head every time I see something that's not right. The world is a very complex place, and sometimes updates take a while, but I think it's a good practice to get in the habit of like having a desire and trying to put forth effort to do the unlearning and relearning. And sometimes it can take years. It might even take your whole life, and it's just a process that for like certain things it might take a long time. So it's a process that I think is worth looking into, and not just giving up on because you've already learned something. I think a lot of times we think like, oh, well, I already learned this, and even though it's wrong, I'm going to stick with it. Or I learned this and I'm comfortable with it, so I'm going to keep doing this because that's how I was raised. Or my mom told me that when I was 5. Or I don't know, I was born that way, or something like that. I'm not here to tell anybody what's right and wrong, but for you, personally, when you take a look at something and you, for yourself, think it's wrong, then stop, pause, and try to figure out why it's wrong, and try to update, try to figure out what's right, and then do what's right. I'm not like yelling at anybody for doing something wrong because they think it's right, or not having the correct information. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about kind of being a lifelong learner where you're always open-minded and looking for new stuff. And when you find something that tells you, hey, something you've been doing is not so good, or when you realize, hey, something you've been doing is not so good, pause and be like, is that true? Okay, let me think about it. Oh, that really isn't good. Let me try and stop doing that. And there's some stuff that's bad, and we know it's bad, and we're just like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing it. Like smoking. I think everybody knows it's bad, but most of the people that do it are just going to keep doing it. But I think that might be a little different, because there's the acknowledgement, like, hey, this is not good for me, but I'm going to do it anyways. That I'm like more okay with than like, I know there's a better way, and I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist because I want to do this way. I'm comfortable with this way. Those are a little bit different. And I'm not here to judge anybody. Like, if you want to smoke, go smoke. But what I'm trying to get at is that unlearning, I think, is a wonderful tool to have. It's not a fun tool to use, but it can put you in a lot better place. You may think you're going backwards, but like when you finish that process and you get that new skill, like before with the old knowledge, maybe you could only go 5 miles an hour. Then you're cruising along at 5 miles an hour. And then you realize you set up something in your engine wrong and you stop. And so you stop for 2 hours to fix your engine. And while you're fixing it, you're like, I could have been going 5 miles an hour this whole time. I could have been 10 miles out. But then when you fix your engine, now you can go 10 miles an hour. So in 2 hours, you're back on track. And then an hour after that, like now you're going faster and you can go way, way farther. And I think that's kind of how unlearning is, where it doesn't seem to be profitable while you're doing it, or when you realize you have to do it, it's like, oh man, that's going to be a lot of work to realize that I'm a white supremacist and then do all this work to kind of undo this conditioning that's been put on me to think this way. It may seem like a lot of work, but if you do that work, now you're more open to meeting different types of people and learning different types of cultures and sharing and experiencing different things. And so that might be great. You might meet your significant other that way. You might get a job in a different country because now you're okay with being in that country and being around those kind of people and stuff. You get to eat different foods and all this stuff. So that's kind of the idea. I think unlearning is important. I hope that it's something that although it is very hard and it's not a fun thing to do, I hope it's something that you do and do. That when the time comes for you to do it, it's something that you recognize and it's something that you can act on. As a bonus, I think that this process is really difficult, but it can be helped a lot by seeking advice from people, kind of like with AA, where in Alcoholics Anonymous, that system like really, 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 really benefits from the mentor program. I think they're called mentors, but like somebody who's been through the program, somebody who has realized that being an alcoholic is not good and course corrected, somebody who's unlearned that behavior of being an alcoholic. And when you have that mentor, when you have that person that's like a guide, it can really, really help you to get through it. So just as kind of like some unsolicited advice from your friendly neighborhood podcaster. If you're trying to do something and it's hard, and especially if it's non-intuitive, like you learned one way and now you have to do a different way, that's very unintuitive or non-intuitive, then see if you can find anybody who's been through a similar thing. Or see if you can find anybody that's doing the thing that you now think that you've learned because you've learned something new. Somebody that's doing something that you now think is right. And when you can find those people, and they usually they love to talk about that because they think it's good. Ask them questions. See if they can be an accountability partner, or just even observe them in a non-creepy, like not stalker way, like in a regular, like that's a legal way. Observe them and see if even that new idea works out. I think that could be very helpful to have examples. So I hope you guys learn good stuff, and if something that you learned was not perfect, which at some point I feel like that's going to happen to everybody, I hope you can see that. I hope you can find a better way. Hope you can unlearn all the stuff in your head that's crazy and contradictory and not good for you, and slowly but surely, step by step, inch by inch, create a way that makes sense, create a way that's stable, and create a way that can, benefit you and the people around you. So, this has been the Perspective Podcast episode on unlearning, and whatever kind of day you had today, I hope it was real. And I hope that this concept of unlearning turns into a good conversation for you somewhere down the road. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys next week.